Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Androidizen Live, Episode 3. On this week's episode, we're going to be taking a look at Android as your games console again. There was a really big announcement coming out of the latest Google breakfast. Effectively, Android 4.3, the latest version of Android that is starting to hit the Nexus devices and will be coming to HTC One and the Galaxy S4 imminently by the looks of it, has got something really big here for gamers and game developers for that matter. So, let's first take a look at some of the things that Google announced. So this is coming from the Google breakfast from the other day. I captured the stream. Now, effectively, they've added quite a lot of new developer features. So in part, this is to kind of energize Android, where you kind of look at how games have come on within the Android operating system. Things have kind of been leaps and bounds now over the last year or so. Graphics quality has got better, the game variety has got better. Unfortunately, what hasn't really got all that, hasn't improved all that much, is Google's ability to kind of tie all of these games together. And so now we have a new application that's available now up on the Play Store, and it allows you basically to see all of the various games that Google have available on the store, the achievements, your friends and what they're playing, their high scores, etc. And it's a really good way to discover games, basically. I've been using the app for a couple of days, and it's considerably better than the previous integration we had just within the Play Store. This kind of shows that Google are taking gaming seriously in a way that Apple kind of have not really got involved with in quite the way we kind of would have hoped. I think Apple are a little bit far behind on realising that games are exactly what people spend their time doing on their devices when they're not working or talking to their friends. Some of the other really big things coming out of this Google announcement was the introduction of OpenGL ES 3.0. Now, you might remember on last week's show, I was waxing lyrical about how Google and the Android operating system and gaming kind of go hand in hand. And over the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to see the traditional games consoles flounder in the market. That's just a simple fact. One of the reasons I was saying that is because when Apple announced OpenGL ES 3, that kind of put the ball back into Google's court to catch up, effectively. Now, the great thing with the latest version of OpenGL, version 3, and this is ES, by the way, as opposed to the pure OpenGL that you might be familiar with on desktop systems. ES is all about embedded systems, so smart devices, your mobile phone, your tablet, your games console, for instance. Anywhere where you don't have a discrete graphics card that you can pull out and replace with another one effectively. Now, the main things that they've done with OpenGL ES3 is kind of a rewrite of large chunks of the system. For instance, the rendering pipeline has been massively overhauled. Now, this on its own is going to allow for better occlusion queries, transformational feedback, enhanced rendering, and support for 4 or more rendering targets. Now, what this does is it kind of spreads a lot of the load out and makes OpenGL more efficient on these devices. One of the main problems that we kind of have with a lot of developers and games at the moment is they don't optimize particularly well for the various devices coming out there, in part because OpenGL 2 doesn't make it all that easy to optimize. You don't have as much headroom, as it were, once you get the game up onto a device. Now, one of the other, and probably the biggest thing that they've done really, is the texture compression system that they now have. So the texture engine has been completely rewritten from what I can tell, and now it allows for developers to create a single set of textures and have them work across a massive range of devices. So the idea is to provide a high-resolution texture that is incredibly well compressed and have that run on anything. Brilliant. That's exactly what we need. At the moment, developers have to do effectively targeting. They have to say, well, use this texture for this device, use this texture for this device. And, if they get it wrong, well, unfortunately, there's a good chance that the game is going to crawl a little bit. We've seen that with games like Asphalt 7, as you're going to see in a moment. Games like Asphalt 7, it's a graphically great-looking game, but the textures look like smears most of the time, purely because they're having to target a lowest common denominator. Now, as you'll see with Asphalt 8 in a second, this is going to be launching on August 9th, I think. You can see, look at the road, look at the lighting, look at the speed. This is running on the Nexus 7 2013, and the graphics quality is comparable, if not better, than games like Burnout by Criterion Studios when they first came out on the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation, for instance. These graphics are as good. In places, they may even be better because the frame rate certainly appears to be more solid. What we don't know is how well this will translate over to non-Nexus devices. We can only hope that devices like the HTC One, the S4, the Note 3, for instance, where we're using Qualcomm Snapdragon S600 processors, will be comparable. Let's hope that it's not going to all come down to the S400 Pro, I think it is, which is running in the Nexus 7 2013. So, I mean, these are, Google is sort of showing off 3 games that have come out recently or are just about to be released and kind of trumpeting how great the graphics look. And I would absolutely agree with that. These are some of the most beautiful looking games we've ever seen. And with a game like Riptide GP2, from what I can tell, isn't using OpenGL ES 3.0. It does show quite how far game developers have been able to push the current technology, as it were. The frame rate is absolutely stunning, as I said in my review last week, and it just works beautifully and in a really, really fluid manner. And no pun intended, it being a game on water. But as you can see from the graphics, things have come on leaps and bounds, even just over the last 6 months for Android, and still using OpenGL ES2. So we aren't that far away from really throwing out the games consoles and just saying to ourselves, I'll just stick my games console in my pocket, thanks. When you look at things like the Ouya console, costing, what, 99 quid? $99? And alright, it's running older Tegra 3 technology. For my mind, it's probably a little bit behind now, if you're looking kind of at the cutting edge. But even so, it's a games console costing less than 100 quid. That is phenomenal. And you kind of have to look at the next generation consoles coming out and kind of say to yourself, well, do we really need to drop £400 on an Xbox, a PlayStation, or whatever else might come out from Nintendo? Or do we need to evolve? And do we need to evolve to say that these devices should be sitting in our hands and in our pockets, not sat in front of the television set, wired up to 300 different media outlets and, you know, doing real-time switching and all of that? And it's kind of like, well, that's great for the living room, but it's not quite right for an Android user who's a bit more on the go. And, you know, to me, it just feels like within 5 years, we simply are going to look at the games consoles and go, but my phone can do that. And probably at a higher resolution, the way things are going, with 4K panels coming down the line and the 2K panels certainly imminently hitting early 2014. There doesn't really appear to be much reason to have a 1080p TV in your living room when your games console is in your hand and produces better graphics and portable. You know, with dropping £500 on a mobile phone, do I really want to drop 400 quid on a games console? Personally, I'm starting to consider whether there's much value in it. You just kind of think to yourself, there's so much variety here. The games are cheaper as well. I mean, why drop $60, 50 quid, 40 quid, whatever they'll come out at here, on a AAA title when we can actually have titles that have AAA gameplay, old school AAA gameplay, you know, the kind of stuff that you used to tell all your friends about because it was absolutely unique for the time. Games like this one, which just off the top of my head has completely escaped me right now, what the title is. I'll just look it up in a moment. But the gameplay is phenomenal, yet it's incredibly simple as games go. It doesn't have groundbreaking graphics, but what it does have is old school gameplay, beautifully well done. And I think it was free. So you kind of think to yourself, well, why would I drop £400 on a games console, 40 quid on a AAA game, when I could have just as much fun playing this? Much more involved, much more engaging, all around just better. So here's another title that I found really, really interesting. It's called Snakes, and it's basically, if you remember the old Nokia game, it's kind of like that, but reinvented. And again, it adds something new that we've not really had for a while. Well, not new, had for a while, you know what I mean? But having games that kind of tap into the simpler way of gaming, but still deliver brilliant graphics, great audio, well, that's everything we expect from AAA titles, isn't it? Fun. Lots and lots of fun. And for my mind, that's what really matters now, how fun these games actually are. And by the way, if you're currently watching on the live stream, do drop us a comment onto this thread, ask your questions. I've got quite a few games here to show you today. Happy to answer any questions you might have, and please do provide feedback as well. Another title that I spent far too much time playing this week is Robot Unicorn Attacks 2. And again, if you compare the graphics between the original Robot Unicorn Attacks and the new one, It's like apples to, or should I say, it's like a rotten apple to a beautiful apple, the most beautiful thing you've ever tasted. Robot Unicorn Attacks 2 is just glorious. I mean, the gameplay is fantastic, it's fun, it just has everything in spades, and it's free. So again, why am I dropping money on a really expensive full-price AAA title that is probably just a shooter with a couple of new game mechanics? Game developing in the AAA side of things has got lazy because all they're doing is chasing, what will sell. All we want is franchises, as Ubisoft would put it. And then you have titles like this that, yes, it's coming out from a fairly well-known independent group at Robot Chicken, but it's beautiful and it's so simple, the gameplay, yet so much fun that you have hours of fun with it. For my mind, like I say, Android, over the next 3 to 5 years, there is going to only be one choice. You're not going to be picking up your games console, you're going to be picking up your smart device that lives with you all of the time, goes with you everywhere, and provides all of that experience right in your hands. Now, I know a friend of mine has just picked up a PS Vita, and he's probably watching the stream right now. He's actually up early for a change. And I played a little bit on a Vita, and as you kind of look at these portable devices, you kind of think to yourself, wow, the Vita is a phenomenal piece of kit. But it doesn't really do anything more than a smart device does. And I've got my 5-inch screen on the Vita, as it were. I've got the dual analog controllers. I've got the weird touchscreen front and back. But quite a bit of that is just kind of a gimmick. And when you look at the games that are AAA, as it were, they're not that much more of an improvement over what we can have on Android if developers will build these titles. And they'll only build these titles once the graphics quality comes up, once they can guarantee a certain level of targetable speed across all of these devices, and obviously they can make a return. For my mind, a 40 quid game that is only going to sell to 10,000 people might make you a reasonable amount of money. However, a game costing £1 that sells to millions of people, or a free-to-play title where your effectively rate per user you're earning is $1 per month, straight away a game developer is going to make a lot more money. And that's why we're seeing so many free-to-play titles these days, and why the likes of Sony and Microsoft are in so much trouble. Because there's only so many really big games companies with their multi-million budgets to go around. There's an awful lot more small developers on these mobile platforms right now who are eating into the market share of these big consoles. We kind of are in this situation now that is very reminiscent in some respects to the 80s, where we have a huge number of small developers churning out lots and lots of games. The question will become how many of those game developers can go on to become AAA title developers on the mobile platform, and what is the risk that the marketplace will kind of collapse in on itself as it did in the 80s. As many of you will know, there's a large number of games cartridges for E.T. which are buried somewhere in the desert. I think someone's actually trying to find those, by the way. But the idea really is that, as a marketplace expands and more people enter it, the quality does tend to get driven down to the lowest common denominator. And it's something that certainly the Android and the mobile communities kind of have to avoid, or else we end up in the same situation in the 80s where basically gaming dies for about a decade. When we look at what's happening with these kind of high-priced consoles, we look at the technology that's going into them, which is basically just off-the-shelf PC parts with a few custom parts done onto the silicon. We kind of already know where the next generation of games is going to go. We can look at that on our PCs if we have fast enough computers and good graphics cards. So the kind of things that we see on the next-gen consoles, it's not all that mind-blowing. However, what we see happening within the mobile space is constant innovation and a constant kind of one-upmanship, not only the graphics quality, gameplay and so on. Everything is kind of evolving much faster there. Certainly much faster than it is within the next-gen consoles, which are just a bit bland and boring. The only thing that we've really got going on that's nice there is the ability to stream our games. I can kind of do that now with my PC if I feel like it. And some of the DRM restrictions that kind of make me think, games consoles, DRM, it annoys me immensely because it's taking away our consumer choice in a lot of cases, especially with Microsoft and region locking. Hopefully Sony will stay true to their word and won't do region locking. It'd be good if they don't. But actually, let's go back now to Asphalt 8. So this is some of the footage that I clipped directly off. They've only provided about 30 seconds, unfortunately. But some of the interesting things with the OpenGL ES that we can kind of see here, I've already touched on the textures on the road surfaces and the environment, which look fantastic. fantastic. But in a moment, you should see the car boost. And you see these light sources that are coming out the back of the car, and that is a key part of what OpenGL ES3 will allow for, is these light flares, very reminiscent of the J.J. Abraham effect, lens flares everywhere, as it were. But also better physics as well, because the renderer is taking on a lot more of the work and doing it more efficiently than it was under OpenGL ES2. You will find that the frame rate should be better, the physics can be better, because they're able to use more of the system power for doing extra stuff and not having to just get textures onto the screen and keep the frame rate up as best they can. So overall, we should see a massive improvement. I mean, the frame rate here is just fantastic, and you compare it to Asphalt 7, even on the best devices currently out there, like the Galaxy S4, and it just feels like it's running like a dog. 15 to 20 frames a second if you're lucky. But maybe a lot of that comes down to Gameloft, who we know doesn't really care about optimizing, particularly unless there's a PR opportunity involved where you're going to get to broadcast to 70,000 people watching a live stream from Google. But everything that we kind of see coming out of games development now, everything we kind of see about the potential of Android with OpenGL ES3 and other things that will come down the line as well, it just makes me think that there is no need for a games console after the next 5-year period. Essentially, we will be hard-pressed, I think, at the next leap, as it were, for next-gen consoles, in 10 years' time or 7 years' time when they start kind of looking and talking about that. I don't think it's going to be a set-top box. I think it's going to be a Surface tablet. I think it's going to be a Sony Bravia or Sony PlayStation tablet. That is, unless Sony get smart and they get their Genki platform that they acquired and simply say, we'll stream PlayStation games to any device for a monthly fee. At that point, I think I would be throwing money at the screen and screaming, shut up and take my money. We know with OnLive, as again, some of you who are watching the stream, if you know me personally, you'll know I spent a lot of time talking up OnLive. Sorry, and sorry again. It had the promise, but unfortunately the execution was atrocious. OnLive was a great experiment. It showed what was possible in the future, but unfortunately the bandwidth constraints, the very poor compression they were using on the video stream that you were actually getting just made the experience, well, not great. And it didn't really work very well on mobile devices either. Trying to translate console controls, a full-size controller with analog sticks, and emulating that on a touchscreen where you really need some sort of physical feedback with most shooters. It was just a fail, really, and eventually the company got into some financial difficulties and had to be rescued. OnLive still exists, it's still out there, but we don't really talk about it anymore, do we? We don't hear about it anymore. It's just become a curiosity. Where Sony acquired the Genki platform, which I believe it got off the guy who created Shiny Entertainment, whose name is Dave something or other, but has just escaped me now. He really understands what was going to be required to get OnLive working. Got Genki and live streaming of gaming working. And for my mind, that's probably where in 10 years' time, that's actually where we'll end up. A lot of these devices will become thin clients. So that is to say, they receive information over the internet, but the actual internals, as it were, is purely just used to display information onto a screen. The processing power, everything is residing within the cloud and being streamed down to us on our broadband connections. At that point, we can kind of kiss goodbye to console gaming in the sense of buying an expensive overpriced box with all this hardware in there in silicon, and instead it will be a case of, well, what size screen do I want, how light is it going to be, and what resolution is it going to be. The rest of it, the power as it were, is very much going to come down from the cloud in 10 years' time. But in the medium term, where Android and where mobile gaming in general is going, it's really going to be an exciting time of improved graphics constantly. This next leap with OpenGL ES3 is going to be a big one, and I think it's going to blow a lot of people away. What we're seeing now is what developers can do with this technology after just a few months. At most maybe they've had 6 to 7 months to kind of develop these techniques with OpenGL ES3. And as you know, within the console industry, what the quality of the games that we see on launch day for a new console, it's like night and day compared to the quality of the games that we see at the end of the generation. You can see that most clearly in games like, say, for instance, a comparable Heavy Rain or Uncharted versus The Last of Us, and you see not only the quality of the graphics going up, but the animation, the motion capture, the atmospherics, the sound, everything improving as they start to wring more and more power out of what they've been given. It's a bit more difficult with the Android and mobile spaces because what we don't have is a commonality between all of our hardware. Unfortunately, it's a very fragmented system unless you're in Apple's territory. But then bearing in mind, in Apple's territory, you get 2 years out of your Apple device and you might as well just sling it in the bin, because Apple will basically say, well, after 3 years, we're not going to provide you a software update, so you won't be getting the latest versions of things like OpenGL, etc. And they start slowing their hardware down quite a bit as they release updates each year. But, you know, in the Android marketplace, for starters, things are a bit cheaper. We can have a games console for £99 that kicks a fair amount of ass. What we can't have, unfortunately, is a well-optimized experience on the latest hardware because there's just too many different variables out there. It's kind of our Achilles heel within Android, and it's something that I just wish Google would find a way to solve it, or at very least find some way to start a standardization process around 3 or 4 SoCs, which is our systems on a chip, so our processors, our GPUs, our memory systems and everything like that, and find some way to work with the main manufacturers and standardize the damn thing each year. Do something to try and make sure that developers can have some dependability on what they're targeting and when. Now, fair enough, it's not going to work for all the third-tier manufacturers. They'll always do their own thing anyway. But the likes of Samsung, HTC, Sony, LG, these are big players in the market, and it should be reasonably easy to at very least get them to do some kind of standardization or publish their specs well in advance and their source codes for their chips so that the game developers can get a little bit more into the internals of these things and work out how to get the power out or where that bottleneck happens to be coming from so they can code around it. A lot of the problems we have with games at the moment on Android is, you know, a bottleneck, for instance, on a Xenos chip purely because the developer doesn't know how to get around that problem because Samsung haven't released source, for instance. All of this makes a big difference to how well gaming is going to develop on Android over the next few years. And for my mind, it's going to develop beautifully. So we're coming to the end of the show. In next week's show, we'll probably look at some hardware, I think. I've got this great Galaxy Note 8.0 here. You've seen my review I posted yesterday. I really enjoyed it, other than a few firmware issues. We're going to be trying to bring in some additional people to talk alongside myself because my throat gets a little bit dry trying to keep up a constant pace and thinking off the top of my head about what I'm going to be saying to you, you know, at the same time talking over a bit of video footage. So it'd be nice to get some extra voices. If you're the kind of person who likes to appear on YouTube or just wants to have an opinion and voice it to the world, get in touch. You can add us on Skype, add Androidizen, or contact us through our Google Plus page. And, you know, we can Skype you in, add you into the video feed, as it were, and turn this into a really interesting show with a range of different views. So please do get in touch, and I hope you enjoyed Androidizen Live Episode 3.